Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon Fitzpatrick and I'm your co-host for today's event. Creating and delivering powerful presentations using an iPad with Microsoft PowerPoint MVP Geetesh Bajaj. Joining me as co-host is Dave Zielinski, editor of Presentation Expert. Let me tell you a little bit about today's program and what it's part of. We started the Expert Thinking program in order to find a way to offer a robust peer-to-peer community for presentation professionals to share ideas, resources, and start discussions. In addition, we started Webinar Wednesdays to offer engaging conversations with presentation experts such as Geetesh, Matt, Rick Altman, Ellen Finkelstein, and more. We want to hear from you, so tell us a little bit about what you're looking for. Make this very interactive. To submit a question or tell us something that you've learned, maybe a tip or a trick, just enter it in the question box on the dashboard. And we want to encourage you to join the Twitter conversation. Just use hashtag PresentationXpert. It's my pleasure to introduce Dave Zielinski, the editor of Presentation Expert and an award-winning writer. His new book, Master Presenter, Lessons from the World's Top Experts on Becoming a More Influential Speaker, has just been released. You can order it on Amazon or through the link on our website. It gives me great pleasure to give you to Dave.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're happy to have you. Our presenter today is Geetesh Bajaj, who has been a Microsoft PowerPoint Most Valuable Professional for more than a decade. Geetesh has been designing and training with PowerPoint for 15 years and is the head of Indezine, a presentation design studio and content development company based in India. Geetesh has authored 6 books on PowerPoint and trains corporate clients on how to plan, create, and deliver presentations. With that, Geetesh, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Dave. In today's webinar, we're going to look essentially at how do you go and do your presentations using an iPad. Now, a whole lot of you have iPads, and even though you have iPads, when you have to give a presentation, you essentially travel with your laptop everywhere because you think that the presentation tool is a laptop and the iPad is for something that is a portable device where you would love to do a presentation, but you're not sure whether it would be really be something that you can work with. So how do you go about presenting from your iPad? And that's what this webinar is all about. At any point of time, if you have questions about what we're discussing, feel free to go and post that in the questions panel, and Sharon will look at those questions and she'll raise them and bring them to my attention, and I'll be happy to answer them. So here we go. Okay. So when we say that you are presenting with an iPad, we are essentially talking about 2 separate issues over here, 2 separate experiences, if I may say so. The first part is that you're presenting from an iPad. Now, from an iPad is pretty similar to how you present using your existing laptop. You connect your laptop to a projector, and using your laptop and a remote, you move from slide to slide, and as a speaker or presenter, you speak to the audience in synchronization with your slides. And you go forth and advance slides one after the other in sequence in a linear fashion typically. And that's something you can also do with an iPad. And it best works with the device known as an Apple TV, and we will go and discuss more about that later in this webinar. Now, the second experience that you do with an iPad is something that takes advantage of how the iPad is, how the iPad's form factor is. Now, look at the iPad's form factor. If you really did not attach an external keyboard to your iPad, it's basically a slate, and you hold it in your hand. It's light enough to hold it, and it's pretty personal and easy to work on an iPad sitting next to another person and show them what's exactly on the screen, talk about it, discuss it, pass on the iPad to another person, get it back, and it can be a real interactive presentation, and this is something that iPad actually adds to the presentation experience. So that's the distinction between how you present from an iPad or on an iPad. So at this point of time, what I'm going to do is, Sharon, can you do this poll up, put this poll up, and we're going to look at how many of you actually at this point of time today use your iPad as a tool to present. So you just go and choose your answers from yes and no and submit the button, press the submit button, and let's see how many of you at this point of time use your iPad as a tool to present.
Well, I'd say it's overwhelmingly a no at this point, so people are really interested in learning. We've had about 81% of you that have voted, and right now it's 70% no and 30% yes. So let's
Okay.
keep it open for about another 30 seconds, and we can close it, and then we can share the results.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. It's overwhelmingly, you can see, to use the iPad as a tool. 70% say no.
You know, the great part is the 30% people actually already use the iPad as a tool for presenting, and the other 70%, they don't do it at this point of time, but they're certainly very interested in using that. And that's something that we're going to look at more during this presentation webinar. And so let's move on. And can I get it back from the poll to my screen, Sharon? Thank you. So, so what you all see on the webinar screen now is results of a survey. The survey was held by a company called BrainShark, and this company creates a great iPad presentation tool called SlideShark, and that's the reason why they wanted to do this poll and find out. And the question is, if you were on a desert island alone, what would you have, you know? Would you rather have an iPad versus one of these other things? Would you like to have a good book or a chocolate, radio, TV, matches, or even your significant other? Or would you have an iPad rather than any of these options? So the great part is that at most of the other options like a good book, chocolate, radio, and TV, as you can see there, people just want an iPad other than that. They don't want any of those things. They rather have an iPad. But the amazing thing over there is like, and this is great because 87% of people actually said they would rather have a significant other rather than an iPad on a desert island where they're stranded alone. But ironically, there were actually 13 out of 100 people said they would rather have an iPad rather than a significant other. And that's amazing. It's like 1 in every 8 people would rather have an iPad rather than having a human companion with them. So that shows how far we have, you know, come across, and how much important the iPad is part of our culture today. It's beyond a computer culture, I would say. It's more of a lifestyle thing now, and it's easy and convenient to move around with an iPad, and people want a lot of their stuff in their iPads ready to present as required. And so that's one big takeaway that we have over here, that the iPad is an important part of their presentation experience and also their lifestyle experience. So why is it that so? And we already discussed a bit of that earlier, and that's because you have tablets like the iPad and also other tablets which are non-iPad, but they are everywhere. Okay, there are people who have multiple iPads, they have multiple tablets, and they use them all the time. And most of these are connected online, so they have access to the cloud. And on the cloud, they have a bunch of their presentations, other documents, and all the other stuff. And even if that was not the case, a lot of these programs that work on iPad and let you share your presentations actually store your presentations on the iPad itself. So even if you have limited access to the cloud where you can actually go and download your files and store them on your iPad and use them later on, that's also an option, and that's certainly the way to go. So presentation experiences, how have they changed? they have changed. They have certainly changed, and they have changed a whole lot. And the iPad is just one part of it, but it is a very important part of the whole presentation experience today. And a lot of companies want to create software that works on the iPad and makes it easy for you to share your presentations. But more about that later. At this point of time, what we're really seeing, the scenario at this point of time, is that your presentation can happen anywhere. There's a tradition of saying that, talking about an elevator pitch, but elevator pitches are not restricted to elevators anymore. It can happen anywhere. So giving you an example, if I'm traveling on a flight and it's a long flight, and the person who's next to me will start talking, and really it comes to that this person is someone who could be a prospective client, or maybe someone I would like to share something with, or I'm passionate about something, and I would like to show it with a bunch of graphics, slides, some charts. So if I have an iPad with me at that point of time, I can actually do a presentation right there. So your presentation can happen in an elevator, in a flight, anywhere. Probably you can do it in a beach, in a restaurant. So the iPad has made that all possible. So you can actually go and do your presentations anywhere. So we've spoken a lot about the iPad, but all iPads are not created equal. So broadly speaking, I'm sure a lot of you have an iPad, but how your iPad or how any iPad works as a presentation tool is quite different depending upon which iPad it is. One thing is common. You can actually do a one-on-one presentation using an iPad, sitting with an iPad next to someone who you are doing a presentation, or we're using pretty much any iPad. There's really no difference there because there's no extra hardware required and nothing to connect. But if you want to connect your iPad to a projector or the television screen, then it gets a little complicated. So essentially at this point of time, we've had 5 generations of iPads. The first, second, third, and fourth generation iPads, the larger iPads, and the iPad mini, for a total of 5 iPad options there. So what we have done here, if you look at the slide that you see on your webinar screen at this point of time, the second and third generation iPads are very similar as far as support for the hardware required to connect to a projector is concerned. And the fourth generation iPad and mini also share a lot of the same options, but the first generation iPad is completely different. So for really any type of serious presenting that you have to do using an iPad, I would definitely not recommend the first generation iPad. But anything beyond the second and third generation, the fourth generation, the iPad mini, I think they all work perfect as a presentation hardware, and they can do the job. You can actually manage with the first generation iPad too, but you will have to practice and try out a few things to see if it works for you. And sometimes they may work and sometimes they may not work. And why is that so? Because the connections are different. Now the connection in the first generation iPad, the connection, when I say connection, I mean the cable that you connect to an iPad. And all iPads allow only one cable to be connected. And that's through a 30-pin adapter for the first, second, and third generation iPads, and with the lightning adapter, which is a small connector for the fourth generation and the iPad mini. So, and you'll see the second, third, fourth generation and the iPad mini have full AirPlay support. What is AirPlay? Now, AirPlay is a standard through which you can transmit audio and video from your iPad without connecting to any wire. And we'll learn more about that later in this webinar. But the first generation iPad does not really support that technology. It does support, it's not right to say that it does not support. It does support, but not really to the level that would be required to use it as a serious presenting tool. And the AirPlay support that the first generation iPad has is limited to very, very few applications. And that's the Photos and the Videos app, and some apps like SlideShark and Keynote also work on the first generation iPad with AirPlay. But to say it again, if you're really serious about iPad presenting, you'll really want to have something higher than a second generation iPad. Again, that was the hardware part. Amazingly,
Geetesh, can I interrupt you
yes,
at this point? We have a question where some people out there don't understand what AirPlay mirroring is and AirPlay. Can you go over that with
yeah.
them?
Yeah, that's actually not what we're going to do is later during this webinar we have a whole set of slides on AirPlay, and we will share with them what the technology is. At this point of time, I would really like to tell them that if you have a second generation iPad or something newer than that, it's got full AirPlay support, which the first generation iPad does not have. So just keep that in the back of your head. And when we actually get to the AirPlay slides, you will really look at how it actually works.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. So that was the hardware part. What is the type of iPads over there? What is the type of support there? But you know, the amazing thing I would call it is that PowerPoint is omnipresent. It's always there everywhere, even on the iPad, although there's no native version of PowerPoint for the iPad. Now, when we talk PowerPoint is the foundation for all presentations on the iPad, I'm not talking about PowerPoint as a program, but I'm talking about PowerPoint as a file format, because a whole lot of presentations are created on PowerPoint. 12 years ago, Microsoft declared that 30 million PowerPoint presentations are created every single day all over the world. How many presentations were we creating 12 years ago compared to what we are creating today? So it was safe to say how many presentations are created today? 100 million, a billion? So we really don't know, but at that number, it really doesn't matter. It's great to say that a huge number of presentations are created every single day, and all these presentations, the 100 million or a billion or even 30 million, the old figure, these are all PowerPoint slides. So these are PowerPoint file format, PPT, PPTX files. And people want to find a way to go and use this content on their iPads, because there's a huge content, a huge resource of PowerPoint files already there. And you know, typically people don't like to reinvent the wheel and go and create the same presentation in another tool. What they'd rather have is they want their PowerPoint presentations to work on the iPad. And that's what we're going to look at as a basis for today's webinar. So we'll look at PowerPoint being the foundation with which you're going to work with your presentations on the iPad. So now I told you you don't have to reinvent the wheel, yes, but you will have to follow certain best practices so that you can maximize the impact that your existing PowerPoint content will have on the iPad. Now, the great thing is none of these is actually very difficult. The first thing you have to do is stay with standard 4:3 resolution slides. So that's not a difficult thing to do, because almost all presentations created until 2 years or 3 years ago were all 4:3 slides itself. And even today, PowerPoint is adept at creating slides in standard resolution. So why do you not create widescreen 16:9 slides for the iPad? Because the iPad's native resolution is 4:3. And it's a small screen compared to your projector or even your larger laptop screens. So if you really use 16:9, you really get, your content is going to get squeezed up over there. So as far as possible, try and use PowerPoint content that has got standard 4:3 slides. Again, if you're using your iPad for one-on-one meetings or sitting next to a person, not connecting to a projector, or even if you're connecting to a projector, because a lot of iPad presentations can be impromptu, where you're not prepared and you just suggest that, okay, let me do a presentation, because with an iPad you're always ready. So you'll want your presentations to be more casual and with fewer slides. And a lot of native PowerPoint features like animations and even effects or charting, you really can't edit them too well on SlideShark on the iPad or even Keynote on the iPad, but they at least look very much so the same as they looked on your Windows or Mac computer on PowerPoint. And at this point of time, I can't emphasize enough, practice and practice and practice as much as you can on the iPad. It's not that you've done this webinar and you go tomorrow and you take your iPad and present in front of a huge audience and tell them, I've learned iPad presenting and I'm going to do this today. You really don't want to do that. You want to practice, make yourself perfect, be confident about what you're doing. You'll run into some issues. You'll have to find solutions to those issues. There's no magic formula where you've just done this webinar and go tomorrow and do it. For the same reason, go and test your hardware, make sure everything works, and that's perfect even if you were doing presentations every single day. I do presentations for more than a decade now, and I will make always sure that I test my presentations just before I present. So always make sure that you practice and test. Why do you do that? This slide speaks it better than anything else. The left half of the slide is the actual PowerPoint slide, and the right half of the slide is what you may, and I repeat the word may because a lot of the programs on the iPad are pretty advanced now, and you will probably never see something like that. But you may get to see something like that, so something you're not expecting. So you have to make sure that you avoid iPad shock. We just call it iPad shock. And what your slides look on the PC or on Windows or Mac using PowerPoint, they should look very similar, almost similar on an iPad. Okay, so we'll now go into the technology part, what you need to know, how you present from an iPad. At this point of time, Sharon, are there any questions we need to take?
Let me unmute myself there. There are a few questions. Lots of people saying very, very interesting so far. Lots of good information. One of the things that we had people asking was, when you say iPad, can it be any tablet? And what I've said is we're really just specifically talking about iPad for today, but a lot of the principles that you're talking about would work on other tablets. Would you agree?
Very broadly speaking, yes. But you know something? This whole webinar has been done from an iPad perspective because the software that we're going to work about, and we're talking about a program called SlideShark from BrainShark, and that's an iPad-only program. Okay, so they are there on other platforms as well, but what we are working upon and talking about is from an iPad perspective. Again, when I talk about the hardware, how do you connect, and stuff like AirPlay, that's again iPad only. Okay, so yes, that's the answer.
So are you presenting on an iPad today?
No, I'm not, because I'm actually need to have my headset and everything put over there, and I would really not recommend iPad for webinars, but definitely for presentations.
That makes sense. I know one of the things and challenges that some people in our audience have talked about is that we need the ability to recharge the iPad and have internet access so they wouldn't be stranded, and that's just something that they need to think about for the future.
Yes. Now, the thing is, iPads have pretty good battery life. So if you make sure that your iPad is fully charged before you do a presentation, I don't think anybody is going to do a presentation that's going to last for more than an hour. Okay. So if you're doing a really, really long presentation, then yes, you need to worry about that. But with the battery lives that today's iPads have, and with the recommended time that, because the audience attention, if you really make it too long, the audience is going to lose focus, and they will not concentrate too much on what you're trying to say. So between those two issues, I think it's all covered.
I think that's great. You're going to tell us about SlideShark, but do you think there's any chance that Microsoft will come out with a PowerPoint application for the iPad so we can get rid of the third-party apps, or is that a politically incorrect question at this point?
It's not. They already have a fairly non-powerful, if I may say so, version of PowerPoint for the iPhone, and which actually works on the iPad too. But I'm hoping they'll come up with something better. Definitely, yes.
And then one last question, and then we'll move on. Do you typically store the slideshow or the presentation on an iPad, or is it run from the cloud?
And when I use a product like SlideShark, it allows me to download the whole presentation to the iPad. And I would certainly do that. And I also gave you an example a while ago where I was on a flight and I was sitting with someone and showed them a presentation. And a lot of flights nowadays have internet, but I rather prefer to have my presentations with me on an iPad. But the cloud support is important because if you update your presentations or if you have a team of people who are presenting on an iPad in the same company, and presentations need to get updated all the time. So the version on the cloud is always updated. So when you have access to the cloud, at that point of time you get them automatically downloaded, and your local copies on the iPad get updated to the latest versions. So yes, a cloud has an important role over there, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be something that you present your presentation from the cloud. We'll just use the cloud as a resource to update and download your presentations.
Terrific. I think I'm going to turn it back over to you to continue with your event, but thank you for answering the questions.
You're welcome. Thank you again for holding on to the question, Sharon. And so we're getting ahead with this. So going back to what we earlier said, there are two iPad presenting experiences. One is presenting from an iPad, which is equivalent to how you would present with a laptop and a projector. And the second is presenting on an iPad, which is one-on-one experiences. Now the thing is, even when you present from an iPad, the from an iPad experience has two distinct ways of presenting. And one is you do it wirelessly without connecting any wire from your iPad, and the second one is to connect it with a wire. I would definitely recommend doing it wirelessly because as a tool, as a medium, as a platform, you really use the iPad better if you don't have it connected to a wire. Imagine you have the iPad in your hand and it's wirelessly sending the signal to the projector, and you can walk around the room with your iPad. You don't have to get worried about any wires coming in the way or walking over a wire or something of that sort. So I think that's amazing. So how do you do that? So that brings us to a question that was asked earlier: what exactly is AirPlay? And in this slide we'll talk about AirPlay. And you can see in this slide you have a television screen, but this could have been a projector. It really doesn't matter. It can be either a projector or a television or a TV, as we say. And you also have your iPad over there. And what's important over here, the view that you see on the iPad is exactly the view that you see on the slide on the TV. How does that happen? Now this happens with a small device known as the Apple TV, which we have highlighted with a red rectangle over there down on the bottom left. And your Apple TV can interface with your iPad wirelessly. So your iPad signals travel to the Apple TV, and the Apple TV in turn is connected to your projector or TV not wirelessly but with a cable. So the scenario is the connections between the iPad and the Apple TV is wireless. That allows you to move around with your iPad, walk around with that, don't have to worry about any cables and wires and nothing connected there. But the Apple TV is connected to the projector or TV with a cable. So what exactly is an Apple TV? In the earlier screen that you saw, you could just see it in a very small representation, small form. So we have a bigger view here. Even though it's a big view, it's essentially so small that it fits in the palm of your hand. So that's an Apple TV, and it receives signals from your iOS device. That's an iPad, and it could also be an iPhone. For all practical reasons, everything that I'm speaking about iPad presenting works with an iPhone presenting too. The same way that I told you that ideally you should have something better than an iPad 2 Plus. So you should at least have iPad second generation. With an iPhone, you would want to have at least an iPhone 4S for this to work. And that's how it's going to work better. So let's go on to the next slide and let me show you how this works. So what you see on the slide now is the back side of the Apple TV. You can see there's an HDMI output cable there, output port there, So you connect that HDMI output port to your projector or your television. So this is the wired connection. The non-wired connection is the one between the Apple TV and your iPad. So does that make sense? And if there are any questions about this, feel free to interrupt me, Sharon, and I'll be happy to answer that.
There is a question. Does the iPad project through the Roku, R-O-K-U, or just Apple TV?
Just Apple TV, because these are all, this is an Apple ecosystem, if I may say so. I'd be very happy if everything was more open, but it's an Apple ecosystem. The iPad is an Apple product, the iPhone is an Apple product, the Apple TV is an Apple product, and they have been created and manufactured to work well together. And they work seamlessly. I would definitely grant them that, and they work very well. So yes, that's the answer.
So we have a couple of comments, including an interesting one from Edgar, who says, I use AirPlay on my PlayStation 3 too, so I think that's pretty interesting. And we do have, there you go. I love that. We combine both gaming and fun. So we had a couple people ask if you could repeat that connection, so talking more about the AirPlay and the Apple TV and how that works with the HDMI.
So yeah, if you were working with a PlayStation, that's great, because people have found ways to get these technologies to work that way.
Right.
But you really wouldn't. But really wouldn't be taking your PlayStation and going in front of a conference, right? The fact that there are a lot of things here at play, Sharon. It's yes, you can do it, but will you do it? That's the other thing. Okay, and now I have to grant it to Apple, and I'm not an outright Apple supporter. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and you're all aware of that. Is the fact that the Apple TV is really, really small, and it is something that you can actually put it along with your iPad and travel, and it's easy to use. So yes, and the other thing is, well, Apple has firmware coming up all the time, and what's working today may not work again tomorrow, but we're talking about the ecosystem that they have put over here with AirPlay, with the iPad, the iPhone, and the Apple TV, and that works.
Well, I know we want to keep going. You have a lot of content, and I know people really want to learn something about how to use an iPad to present. So let me let you keep going.
Sure, and please feel free to interrupt if there are any questions come up there.
Great.
Okay, so these are the cables. Essentially what you can do is you can connect the HDMI output of your Apple TV to a DVI connector or to another HDMI connector. So if you were typically connecting to a projector which does not have HDMI, you would connect it to a DVI connector. And if you were to connect it to a TV, you would connect to using an HDMI to HDMI converter. Now the cables that you're seeing on screen, they are actually original Apple products, and they work. Now yes, there are a lot of other cables that work as well, but you just have to try it out and see what works for you at this point of time. But these products from Apple, they do work. So that's the hardware setup of connecting from your iPad to a projector wirelessly. So similarly, you can also connect from your iPad to a projector or a television using a wired option. And this is how it looks like. We're just waiting for this slide to show up. There you go. So it's essentially the same. What you see on the iPad is what you see on the display on the projector and TV as well. It's probably much more simpler because but even though it's simpler, there's still, if you look closely, there are two wires over there. There's an adapter and a cable over there. So it's an iPad to an adapter. Now that, why do you use an adapter? Because the cable is an HDMI cable. So this adapter is essentially an iPad 30-pin to an HDMI converter. If you have the newer iPad, this is 4th generation or iPad mini, So you similarly have a lightning to an HDMI converter like that as well. So the adapter also has an extra slot for a 30-pin over there, so if you can actually keep charging your iPad as long as well as you present. Now that makes a lot of sense here because you have a full wired environment and you really wouldn't want to charge your iPad when you're walking around with the iPad, so so this would work there. And then you connect your iPad with an HDMI to HDMI cable to your television or projector, and that's it works. But again, you're just mimicking the laptop at this point of time. You're really not getting much out of this. So if you really want your iPad experience, presenting experience with an iPad to be amazing, I would certainly recommend that you get an Apple TV, work with that, because there's something that's so liberating about you don't have to be there with your laptop. You can just take your iPad. Your iPad in your hand is your presentation tool. It's also your remote, and it's just what you need, and you just move from slide to slide on your iPad, and you see it exactly on screen on your projector or anything else. So you really don't even need a remote if you use the wireless option. With the wired option, things change. Again, these are the cables that you would use. For a 30-pin iPads, you would use this digital AV adapter from Apple, and they similarly have a Lightning to VGA adapter also. They have a bunch of other adapters also available. Just visit the nearest Apple store, and you typically will get a DVI, HDMI, VGA, all the type of adapters. And Apple stores also carry a lot of third-party adapters that also work. Okay, so what we looked now was how do you connect your iPad to a projector wirelessly and through a wire. And now we're going to the second experience, that is not presenting from an iPad but on an iPad, and what you really need to know hardware terms to work with that. Really nothing, because the hardware is in your hand at that point of time. So just make sure you're comfortable and restrain yourself to have a smaller audience. Best to have an audience of one, but if you're really in a situation where someone just comes in and wants to be part of the presentation, then definitely not make it more than 3. And if it's more than 3, you have to make sure that everybody in the audience can see your slides. And also you can pass around the iPad if required, and make your presentation, talk more, be conversational, a little chatty, and it has to be an informal thing to work. I don't think presenting on an iPad without any projector is something that can be very formal. So it has to be a little casual. So let's go and look at the whole system, what works and what we're looking at over here. So if you're presenting from an iPad, you could have 1 to many people with an iPad, maximum of 3. That's a source. And what is the technology in play? The real technology in play is only when you're presenting from an iPad. If it's wireless, it's using AirPlay technology with an Apple TV. If it's wired, you're just plain connecting with cables. And finally, the output, you could connect to a projector or a TV with using from an iPad, or just have the output on the iPad itself, on the device, if you're not using a projector or a television. So this is sort of what we have already spoke about, but the fact is you don't need any extra devices. But there's one very, very significant aspect that you have to be very careful about when you're presenting with an iPad, because you're suddenly presenting with an iPad and you're on landscape orientation, and suddenly you just move your iPad and the whole presentation turns to portrait. So that's something you really don't want to happen. So if you go to the preferences panel in your iPad and the general settings, you have an option that you can set your lock button on your iPad to lock the orientation. So once you do that, in landscape mode, it will stay in landscape mode and not move to portrait mode. Very important that you do that before you present with your iPad on a one-to-one situation. From an iPad, as I already said, we are paraphrasing here. The iPad is acting as your source and your remote, and you can walk around the room with your iPad. Again, make sure you practice this and try it out before you actually do it in front of a very important presentation so that you're comfortable with this scenario. And so that's how it is. So before we move on to the next section of this presentation, Sharon, is there anything that you want me to answer?
Good question. We have lots of questions about kind of this whole section, but let's get through the others and I'll save them to the end.
Sounds great, Sharon. So you have to make sure, whatever way you present, if you're presenting on a laptop, or you're doing a webinar, or you're doing a presentation on an iPad, you have to make sure that your audience is engaged and audience is concentrating on the content that you're trying to put across to them. So we're going to share basic simple ideas with you at this point of time, and we're going to look at pictures. So whenever you're actually trying to make a presentation and you're putting slides, try not to put too many pictures on a single slide. Always try to focus your visual interest with one solitary single picture that can cause a statement for a presentation rather than going and putting too many pictures over there. Okay, now that is one way of looking at it. If you really need to, put multiple visual interest content on one slide, then what you would do is you would get them all together with Unity. Now what we have here is we have 4 pictures, but we actually got them all together in unison so that it gives a single message over there. And these are essentially shapes. These are shapes for PowerPoint where we put fields over there. If you want to know more about the shapes, there's a URL down on the bottom left over there. That will take you to the page where these shapes are available. And one big issue with a lot of people have with animation is that they use a lot of animation in the presentation, and that actually does not increase the attention value of your presentation, but rather distracts it. Now I'll give you a very simple example for animation, is that let's imagine we are not in a webinar, we are in a presentation room now, and I'm doing a presentation. And I'm moving from the left of the room to the right side of the room. And the audience, the eye of the audience is going to move with me. So when I move from left to right, the eye of the audience will also move from left to right of the room. And that is getting attention with movement. And animation is also movement. On the other hand, if everybody in that room stood up and started walking in different directions, then I don't think any person in the audience would be able to concentrate on that movement. So that would be distraction. So as far as possible, use less animation, use animation only to enhance, and do not use animation which is too much. So make sure that it does not distract your audience. And now we talk about how do you go and add value to your presentations with hyperlinks. Now hyperlink is something that you click on one part of a slide and go somewhere else. Now why do I get into a topic of hyperlinks when I'm talking about best practices? Because when you actually use hyperlinks in a presentation on an iPad, it can be important because there are some limitations with an iPad presentation where hyperlinks can actually work in your favor. So it first of all, it allows you to sort of declutter all your slides. You don't have to put too much content in your slides. If anybody wants more information, you can click on the hyperlink and take them to a slide or some external document or a web hyperlink which has more information. It can also increase your communication level with those hyperlinks, and they're easy to add in PowerPoint. And tools like SlideShark, when you add hyperlinks in PowerPoint and convert them with SlideShark, and more about that later in this webinar, allow you to retain those hyperlinks even in the iPad converted presentations. So that brings us to SlideShark. Now SlideShark is a free tool from Brainshark. The tool itself is free, and the free option allows you a limited amount of storage, and you can save all your converted presentations on the SlideShark cloud storage server, and you can download them to your iPad, but if you want more storage, you pay for that. So as far as I think it's like PowerPoint for the iPad as far as I'm concerned, because it's amazing. It does a whole lot of stuff. I have worked with SlideShark people from the day this product started, and you get them feedback, and they really work on that, and they make it better and better and better. They added a whole lot of support for a lot of other stuff. Hyperlink support was one of the things they added based on a lot of feedback that we provided to them. So go and take a look at SlideShark. I'm going to give you a small demo of how this works. So how does it work? There are three elements to working with SlideShark. You first upload your SlideShark presentation to their servers. Basically, this is nothing but your PowerPoint file. So you go to the SlideShark website, or even on your iPad, once SlideShark is installed, you can have an option that says send to SlideShark. When you click on an email attachment, that is a PowerPoint file, and this is your PowerPoint file is sent to SlideShark servers, where it is converted to the SlideShark format on their servers, and then you can view it on your iPad. You can download it on your iPad when it is converted, and you can also share it with others on SlideShark. And also, when you connect your iPad to a projector, wired or wireless, as we explained earlier, and show it to your audience. So how does it work? So you just go, and it works. You just typical gestures that you work with your iPad, swiping left and swiping right to go from the previous slide and the next slide and what you would expect. And it's intuitive, logical, and exactly as how you would expect PowerPoint to work on an iPad. Other than the fact that this is not actually PowerPoint, but it looks a whole lot like PowerPoint. And it also supports a whole lot of other features. You also have something like a presenter's mode, which you use to on PowerPoint. You can see your notes here. So essentially what's actually on the iPlay projector at this point of time is a top left screen that you say that had that title called Mobile Landscape and the tree over there. And that's what your audience will see. And on the iPad, you would see your notes, what's the next slide coming up, your elapsed time, and the time used for the current slide, and all that stuff. And you can see how many animations are remaining on one particular slide. There are other options other than SlideShare. One of them is Apple Keynote. It does an amazing job of taking PowerPoint files and using them within Keynote on the iPad. But it doesn't do, I personally think it doesn't do as good a job as SlideShark does. And then you have Office Mobile, which is essentially not an iPad application, but an iPhone application. So it's natively, if you just, by default, if you use it on an iPad, it opens in a small window on the iPad. You can maximize it. Yes, it works, and you can basically do small edits in that, but it's not a very seamless experience. Hopefully we'll have this is definitely a version 1 product from Microsoft, and I'm really hoping that we'll have a better product coming soon from them. So now that we've looked at how iPad can be used as a wonderful tool for present, so we're going to revisit this poll, and we're going to ask you, do you want to use iPad as a tool for presenting to your audience? So please go ahead and vote. Sharon, can you put up the vote for me, please?
We've got great support. We've got 93 of the people who are saying yes and only 8% saying no, and that's only with 50% of the votes in.
Awesome.
Amanda thinks we should have had a maybe answer.
Yes. But so we'll probably wait for a while and for the votes to come in, and tell me when you can put up the results, Sharon, and let's see how I'm really interested in seeing how they are different from the yes and no questions that we had at the beginning of the webinar.
Yes, I think so too. We've got about 69% of the folks have voted. Let's give it another 30 seconds and I'll close the poll. But the numbers are staying pretty much the same at 92% yes and 8% no.
Wow. So that's like 70% of the people in the earlier poll said they don't use iPad to present, and almost bearing a few, almost all of them actually would like to use the iPad as a tool to present.
Yes, and I'm going to cut it off at this time because Amanda brought up a good point, so thank you. She's teasing me and teasing us and saying the others have not voted because they are unsure and they needed that maybe tab. So at this point, I'm going to close the poll and let me share the results with you.
Sure. So that's great. So let's assume that the 30% who already use the iPad for presenting are part of the 90% that we see there, and added 60% of them would like to use the iPad as a tool to present, and I think that's an awesome number.
I do too. I think that's great.
Okay, so let's move on with our. So we are in our question and answer slide now. Sharon, do we have any questions?
Oh, that's a loaded gun. We have lots of questions. So
how are we doing? I'm sorry. How are we doing time-wise?
We have about 8 minutes left, but we can run a little bit over if you want to take the time to answer the questions. So we have lots of questions. Does SlideShark and/or Keynote retain the fonts and hyperlinks you set up in PowerPoint on a PC?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is most certainly retain the hyperlinks. I'm not talking about Keynote at this point of time. I'm talking about SlideShark. And for the same reason which I told you, that if you really serious about working on an iPad as a presentation tool, things may change in the future. But at this point of time, you really want an iPad 2 or second generation or higher, and you want to be working with SlideShark rather than any of the other tools. I really hope there are a lot of other tools which would put this level of support that SlideShark provides. But with hyperlinks, yes, you really want to use SlideShark. Other part of the question, what to do with fonts. What I would really recommend is that you use fonts that are sort of not a really exotic font or something of that sort. A SlideShark does support a huge number of fonts though, and the answer to that question is that you really would want to go and test it out and see if it works or not. I think that's important. So if you have an important presentation, upload it to SlideShark, and most of the time it will work. If it doesn't work, you can also send them feedback, or if that doesn't work, you can actually use a font that will work.
So can a slideshow developed on SlideShark be converted to a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation for viewing?
No, I would suggest that as a one-way street because you don't create a presentation on SlideShark anyway, right? So when you have a presentation on SlideShark, you're essentially creating it on PowerPoint to start with. And so if you want your SlideShark presentation to be changed, so you would actually update your PowerPoint presentation and re-upload or replace your existing presentation on SlideShark to do that.
Okay, terrific. We've had a couple of comments or questions about what's your experience been using YouTube as an option for maybe storage?
Essentially what you're doing, if you're doing YouTube, you're showing a movie. You're really not showing a presentation. So when you look at the stuff you can do with SlideShark, you can have your speaker notes, and you can choose exactly when you want to move on to the next slide. You can have animations on demand and stuff like that. And there's a whole lot of stuff on a presentation that's different from a movie clip. So definitely if your presentation and there are scenarios where a lot of presentations would work good enough to be a movie clip. If that works, then yes, YouTube could be an option. But why do that? Because I would only do something like that if I had no other option.
Okay, so here's another question. Is there another app that will help in converting Microsoft Office documents to be iPad compatible other than SlideShark? For example, Documents to Go, Cloud On, Quick Office Pro?
Yeah, yes, the answer is yes. Now Now this webinar is limited to presentations, so we're actually focusing on PowerPoint as a file format. If I had to talk about the whole Office document thing, like Word documents and Excel stuff as well along with that, then definitely SlideShark wouldn't be sufficient for everything. So you really would like to go at options like documents to go, as suggested a while ago. But I think SlideShark does a better job of working with the PowerPoint files than documents to go does.
Okay, we have a lot of questions about Apple TV, so let me kind of try and focus on that group. Specifically, is the Apple TV beneficial if the presentation or the slideshow is being displayed on a smart board?
It's essentially the Apple TV is not doing nothing to the smart board at that point of time, and Apple TV is an only interface between your iPad and your presentation display mode, okay, your output. So I don't know if Apple TV as such supports any smart board platform, but if your smart board works with any of the connectors that Apple TV supports with, I would recommend just go and try that out and see if it works.
Okay, terrific. Other questions, if you have Apple TV, do you need to use AirPlay, or can you just not connect wirelessly directly to the Apple TV?
The existence of Apple TV, the reason for its existence is AirPlay, and so I mean that says it all, right? Because you really wouldn't use an Apple TV unless you wanted to wirelessly transmit from your iPad somewhere else.
Okay. Do you need a separate app on iPad to be able to present through Apple TV?
No. Every iPad from the iPad second generation onwards has got iPad mirroring, AirPlay mirroring, sorry, built in. Okay. So what you would do is when you actually connected to an Apple TV, when you actually get an Apple TV, okay, let me go and put it across this way. When you get a new Apple TV and you use it for the first time, you have to pair it with your iPad. And at that point of time, when the same Apple TV is available in a close enough to your iPad, so iPad detects it and allows you to mirror it to your Apple TV. So they are always paired to each other at any given point of time.
So is the wireless connection from the iPad to the Apple TV dependent upon having access to a wireless network, or does the Apple TV broadcast have its own connection to the iPad?
You really don't need to. You don't need an internet connection. Because basically, what's happening is the iPad and an Apple TV can make a connection between themselves. Okay.
Great. So we have lots of questions, so this has been terrific. So there are also a question about whether or not if you have an idea of what the cost of Apple TV is?
I don't know. I think the last time I got it was $99.
And is that for how long, or?
It's a device. You own that device. It's just like how you own your iPad.
Okay. I'm going to do last call for questions. Do we have any more questions for Geetesh? He's been just so wonderful.
You know, if you have any questions, and if people can send it across to you, you could just send them across to me, and maybe we could compile a list of them and send them a document later on.
Okay, so we did get a couple more questions. So what do we do when the iPad changes orientation in between a presentation or in the middle of a presentation?
Well, the first question is you really don't want to be doing that. That's the reason I said that it's very distracting when you're presenting and your whole content goes rotated, 90 degrees at that point of time. So the thing is, you have to make sure that the settings in your iPad use a lock button for locking orientation, because it can also be used for something else. So if it happens and you have not done that, just be very careful holding your iPad. Don't, shake it a lot so that it doesn't rotate.
That's it. That's good. So is there any news about Microsoft providing a better version of PowerPoint on the iPad?
They haven't promised anything yet. They don't even support the iPad as a option for PowerPoint at this point of time. The only thing that they support is the iPhone, and the iPhone app actually works on an iPad, but a lot of people have not been happy with that because you need an Office 365 subscription to even launch the app in the first place. So yes, that's how it is at this point of time. I'm hoping that things will get better, and this is a first generation product, and it can actually only get better. That's what I'm optimistically thinking about.
So Karadine has a question. If I embed videos into my PowerPoint on my PC and then save the file and then transfer it to SlideShark, will the embedded videos stay linked, or would I have to reconnect the videos once in SlideShark?
No, what happens is when you upload it to SlideShark, SlideShark actually converts the videos within the presentation into the SlideShark format itself.
That's good to know. Edgar is just.
But there's a I'll just I think there's I haven't put across the whole picture there, and that's when your videos are embedded, which the latest versions of PowerPoint do. But what if your videos were linked? So definitely don't link your videos. Make sure they're embedded.
Terrific. Edgar is somebody who's also got lots of good information, so I want to share another point besides having his PlayStation. He said, I open my PowerPoint on CloudOn. It's free. So that's just...
Yes. That's great, but you know something, I totally agree with Edgar on that front. It's great to have CloudOn, and but what essentially is happening is CloudOn, the servers of CloudOn is running an instance of PowerPoint, and that's what's actually showing on your iPad. So first of all, you need a pretty very good connection to the internet, a fat pipe to the internet for that to work well. And if I had to do that in front of my audience, I wouldn't want to risk that. I would not want to depend on the fat pipe or stuff like that. I would want it to be under my control as far as possible. So yes, that's what I would just say on that front.
Okay. Jake has a question for you. He cannot find AirPlay on the iPad. Can you give him some suggestions where to find it?
Sure. Essentially what you would do is, the coolest suggestion is you can actually, it depends from the iPad to iPad model, okay, and with iOS 7 they might have changed some settings. But what you have to do is does he have an Apple TV connected at this point of time?
I don't know. Jake, can you put that answer in the question and let us know?
So it would depend. It would depend to a large extent of you having an Apple TV in the periphery and pairing it with that. So unless you don't have that, so
he says no Apple TV at this time.
So it's only when you have an Apple TV in the periphery and you can pair it there, then it's only then that AirPlay support will show up there, right?
Terrific. So this is our last questions. What do I need to be careful about? Are there any important presentation features that I would be missing in case I use an iPad for presenting?
Yes, the broad answer is yes. A lot of features you might be missing, but the gap is narrowed down to a large extent. I would say that SlideShark definitely supports 80% of the features in PowerPoint, but there are still those 20% features which may not be supported. But there are a lot of workarounds to that. They have communities that work around that, and you know, what you would want to do is, that's the reason I say you always practice, test, because you don't want to run into something which is not working in front of your audience. And that's true not only about iPad presenting, but about presenting in any form. So you really want to do that. So my message to all of you who've been kind enough to attend today's webinar is always go and try it out, play with this stuff, and be confident and happy about what you're doing, and only then go and do a full presentation using this technology.
I want to thank everybody for coming and just encourage you to watch your calendar and watch your emails to get an invitation to In the Trenches, real-world and battle-tested techniques for maintaining best presentation practices in challenging corporate environments. Nolan Hams is a whiz when it comes to presentation. presentations. He's an expert, he's a designer, and I saw him present at the recent Presentation Summit, and I know it will be a wonderful experience for all of us. Thank you again for coming. See you next month.